And yeah. Not only because of that, but because her story is incredible. So yeah, let's just pray for you, Gwynneth, and then hit us with the good stuff. So yeah, Lord, thank you so much for this daughter of yours. Thank you for what you've done in her life. Thank you for the grace that you put on her for the benefit of all of us. And Lord, we just pray that you'd open our hearts to receive, her lips to speak. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Doug. Is that working for you on Zoom? Thank you. Some of you in the room here know my story. Some of you may not know my story, but we've just sung about the goodness of God running after and chasing us down. And my life story is a little bit crazy, and it's just the most amazing when you reflect on it, a picture of how God chases us down, puts people in our path, changes circumstances, and just brings incredible things into life and back to life. And God has never given up chasing me down, and has never given up bringing light into dark situations. So I will give a brief recap of my story, and I'm sorry for those that have heard it before. So I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I became a Christian when I was about 14 through amazing circumstances of just God placing the right people in my life at the right time. And then it wasn't received terribly well by my family, but I just kept going because God was amazing and just kept putting people around me and youth leaders and stuff. And then I left home and I was free from home. I could get on with being me. And I was quite naive as an 18-year-old moving to Bristol. And I very quickly met this guy whom I just totally trusted, fell in love with in a very hedonistic kind of youthful way. And but he had a very ulterior motive and very different plan for what was going to happen in our relationship. And he ended up putting me through a 6-hour ordeal of just really disturbing, really nasty things, and leaving me with very bad scars emotionally, psychologically, and physically. And the morning after, I can remember just trying to make myself feel better again and having bath after bath after bath. And I made a bargain with God, and I said, I could choose to do one thing. So either I let my life just crumble and fall apart because I just can't cope with what's happened to me, or I'm just going to resolutely become the best nurse I can possibly be, because that's why I'd come to Bristol. I'd come to train as a nurse. And that was the bargain I'd made with God. But in doing so, I shut down so much of my life. I shut my life down emotionally. I couldn't make relationships. I couldn't trust. I couldn't just be me. I was just going to devote myself to my job, and I didn't have a life outside of my job really at that time. It's slipped up. And so I just carried on like that, and it wasn't particularly sustainable. Okay, it wasn't a sustainable way of living, because I did meet my husband, and I was incredibly blessed. God was incredibly gracious, and I met my husband at 1B before LoveBristol owned it. And I got married and I went on to have children. But it wasn't until my daughter, who was 3, was very, very sick, I actually really, really encountered God. And she was so sick, she was in hospital, and I ended up praying and giving her life back to Jesus and saying, you're my gift. She's my gift from Jesus, and the only thing I can do is gift her back to God. And she was miraculously healed despite having a near-death experience. And that opened my eyes up to all kinds of possibilities. And I really started to question who this Jesus was, who God was, how powerful he was, how he still lived and existed and did stuff in the world today. And I started questioning big time. And then when I'd had my 3rd child, I was in the school playground, and I'd begun to think about, what if this man had done stuff to other people? What if this man was, what if my daughter went through something like I'd been through? What would we do? Would we report it? Would we do anything? Because I'd never reported it. I didn't tell anyone for 3 years what had happened to me. Um, so there are all those questions going on. And I was in the school playground one morning, and there was a lady that was really, really upset. So I did what I do. I did what a Gwynneth does, and just motherly bundled her home, brought her into my front room for a cup of tea, and just said, if you want to talk to me, there is, you can talk to me. Shall I have to? Is that better? Can you hear me now? Uh, okay. So I bundled her home, brought her home, offered her space, and gave her a cup of tea. And she started to talk, and she started to talk about her brother who lived on the south coast, who'd just been arrested for somebody have done, because that's not what my brother would do. And as she started talking about him, I just knew who it was. I knew it was the same man. From the things that she told me about her own life and her parents, there were some real identifiable features of her own life to the childhood that this man had told me about he'd had. So I went into the kitchen and had this rather long conversation with God as I made another cup of tea, and said, what do I do? Do I confront her? Do I say something to her? And it was so clear what I had to do. And I went back and I spoke to her and I said, is your brother this man? And she just like froze and said, how could you know? And I said, because he did it to me. This is what your brother did to me. What should we do about it? And then I just gave her the space, and she was so angry, she just stormed out my house and didn't want to speak to me again because she couldn't believe what I was saying to her. So I then started thinking a lot more about it, and I did actually report it to the police. And the police came and took statements and said they would look for him on file. And he said, I'm really busy, it'll be about a week before I get back to you. This was sort of in the morning. By 3:30, he'd phoned me back, and he said this chap had just been arrested on the south coast because he had indeed assaulted somebody on the south coast. And because it was a minor, he was in custody and he wasn't going to be let out of custody very soon. So that was all a big shock for me. But I brought Jesus into it, and it was redemptive in a way, but incredibly painful and incredibly hard to walk through. So anyway, so time went on, and he was imprisoned, and he was imprisoned for quite a long time. And about 6 months after he'd been put into prison, his sister came and knocked on my door again. Firstly, to apologize, and she really made a heartfelt apology. And then she said, I need to ask you the impossible question. My brother is an absolute wreck in prison. He's on suicide watch. He doesn't want to live. All he talks about is a Christian girl that he assaulted, and we worked out that must have been you, and that you were the first girl that he assaulted. So she said, I'm going to ask you to do the unimaginable. Would you visit him in prison? So I took some legal advice, sought counsel, and decided I would go. And I was convinced in my prayers with God that I was hearing God go in. I knew what I was going to say to him. And I went in and I sat in the chair. This incredible moment where God spoke to me, and it felt like he'd poured hot oil over me, and he just was running this ticker tape in front of my eyes of how he saw this man in front of me. The man I saw was completely broken. His body language was such that he was just all curled up and just not able to communicate. He wanted to be there, but he didn't want to be there. He was obviously deeply embarrassed. He didn't know what to say. And all God showed me was that he was loved, he was whole, he was complete, he had worth and value, he had a job, he was just the most, I could see it was the same man that was sat in front of me, but the man God showed me was totally different and healed and beautiful and just living life full. So I somehow managed to talk to him, and I went in 6 times over 18 months and continued to talk to him. And then towards the end of that time, he gave his life to Christ. And then I handed him over to the prison services. And then I walked because I had myself. So roll on a lot longer, and my relationship with God had completely changed. I was living and walking the everyday with God and open to Holy Spirit. Went to the 2010 Bill Johnson conference and just found it so refreshing, because all the thought processes I'd been having were thoughts that Bill was talking about heaven coming to earth and about us living, bringing heaven to earth. And my life just started to unfold a little bit. I started to unfold and rediscover who I really was. And then roll on to about 2017, I just started work in Habitat, and I discovered this community that was thinking very similar things, living out a radical way, how would want us to live out a radical way and walk like Jesus, talk like Jesus. And it was just incredible. And then I had a phone call from the Home Office. And the phone call from the Home Office was to tell me that this man was dying. And he'd written an end-of-life directive care plan thing. And he had asked if I was willing, would I go in and pray with him? And he was reaching that point where he needed that person to go in and pray with him. So I did. And I put it off, and they phoned me again. And then I went in. And I went in really early one morning. And I effectively prayed him home. And he died when I was with him. But it was the biggest privilege to be able to pray him home. And it was all so much redemption for him, so much redemption for me. And it was just an incredible moment, and took me into even more freedom that I could ever have hoped of experiencing. It was tough, it was hard. Doug will tell you how hard it was, but God pitched up, and God's love just took me in a completely different direction. And then, so I was just beginning to process that. And the following week, my eldest daughter was randomly stabbed in the community in Hallfield. And I'll come back to that in my talk. But God pitches up. When you least expect him to, God pitches up and takes you by the hand, and he shows you what love looks like. He shows you what compassion looks like. So I thought I would just go back to one of my favorite passages in the Bible, which talks about love and talks about the fruit of the Spirit. There were 3 passages I could have used, but I've taken the one from Galatians 5, verse 22, which says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And I think I love this passage because I've seen how God has taken each one of those attributes and brought them into my life to bring healing, to bring redemption, not just for me, but for other people through me and through my story. It's brought stability into my life. It's brought healing into my life. It's changed my rather skewed and damaged thought processes. And it's like God has given me a gift. And I've been learning over the last 5 years, particularly, of how I use that gift. Because you receive a gift, you have to have open hands to receive a gift. And then you have to make a choice of whether you unwrap that gift and learn about that gift and experience the joy and the pleasure and the beauty of that gift. And that's what God has done with me. He's given me this gift, and at each step of my story along the way, he's revealed a different part of the gift and shown me, most importantly, how to use it. So I've experienced incredible love and forgiveness from God. I was so detached, and I used to make terrible mistakes, acting in my own strength. I made this bargain with God, but it wasn't really God working in me. It was my bargain with God that I was going to be the best nurse. And he was so gracious. He allowed me to become a really good nurse, and I had a really good career, but it wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't what he wanted me to do for the rest of my life, which I've discovered. The morning after the ordeal that I went through, he did give me the beginning of the elements of gift of faith, but I had to learn to unwrap it, which is what I've done. I've had moments where I've learnt about the Holy Spirit, about being patient, about being self-controlled with my children. God softened my heart. When Molly was so sick and in hospital, he softened my heart to help me reach a point where I could give my daughter back to him and receive his love. His love was just so incredible. He gave my daughter back to me. And it's hard to explain, but there was such an exchange of love in that moment, not just for my daughter, but for me, and giving me back as a mum, my daughter. He softened my heart before I went into prison, but it wasn't until the moment I was with the man in prison that he completely softened my heart. But he'd prepared me so that I knew he could give me the gift that I needed to take to that man in order for that man to experience love and to discover love again. I've had gifts of relationship with God. That grew from my terms to his terms and then into a beautiful partnership. And he's taken every part of the difficult part of my life and redeemed it. Even now in the job that I'm doing, which for some people is a bit controversial, you know, vaccinating people, there's been redemption and healing from the past experience, my former life as a nurse. But the thing about this gift of faith is it takes time and it takes hard works and it's intentional. And I have to choose to practice walking with God. I invite Jesus into the everyday. It used to be when I woke up, oh, good God, it's morning again. Whereas now it's good morning, God. Every day it is good morning, God. And the first thing I do is invite Jesus into my life every morning and invite him into the adventure, invite him into the conversation. And there is a background conversation with God the whole day. So for me, it's quite easy now to take God into my workplace. So I go in and I walk around and I pray in my workplace before the day starts. And it changes the atmosphere. It changes the nature of the day. And it is incredible. I have so many stories from this job that I've only been doing since January, where God has intervened in and come into conversation. Bearing in mind, I only have 3.5 to 5 minutes with each person. People are leaving the pod where I vaccinate them, feeling different, feeling lighter. There's a lightness being brought into their life. And they notice it. And they say, oh, what's different about you? What's different about this? The staff have noticed there's something different about the way I present myself at work and present my life at work. It's very hard because I can't talk about Jesus. I'd be in terrible trouble if I even mentioned the word in the NHS place. So for me, this whole experience and life-changing experience of love and compassion and forgiveness has infused into my life and it's become my identity. And I think that was borne out most of all when we went through the court case for my daughter's stabbing. And the perpetrator was very, very ill. And we knew that from the beginning. And we didn't actually ever feel any anger towards him because he was so unwell. So we took a stance in the courtroom of forgiveness. We took a stance of love. We wrote to the family before the sentencing, telling them why we were behaving like we were behaving. So we wrote a letter so much on herself, and the message was passed on to her son in prison. We talked in that letter about why we were behaving like we were. So we talked about our faith, we talked about believing in Jesus, we talked about the love and the hope that having that faith brings, and the miraculous that can come with that. And how we were going to commit to praying for that family for as long as God was telling us to pray for them. But for me, it's a lifelong commitment. He's now in a care facility for a minimum of 25 years. So every day I make time to pray for him. I have no idea what's happening with him now. I could maybe try and find out. But for now, I just place him into God's hand in absolute childlike faith that God is going to get hold of him and take him into the next part of his journey. And I think that is the other thing that I have really learned over the years, is how to become more like in my faith. I am essentially a very simple creature. I trust. That's been the hardest journey of all, is learning to trust, not just God, but people around me. But I have done it. And I am immensely grateful, because that's released me into the most incredible friendships and relationships. And part of that healing process has been this community. Dylan was talking about it earlier, and I just so identify with what Dylan was saying, because without this community, I wouldn't be stood here now. Without Release Academy, without Doug, without Greg and Claire, I wouldn't be, and other people, I would not be standing here now. Because having a community that is consistent in its love and the showing of that love around me has helped me walk through difficult times, difficult mistakes, times when I've been a bit prickly, to say the least. Just because I'm working it out, I'm working out what it is that has to change about me, and God, what is God challenging me to now? What is God working on me now? The result of that is the person you see this morning, the person you see bumbling around Stokes Croft, going off to the vaccination centre. And it's not a journey that's ended, it's a journey that is continuing. And every morning I wake up, I choose to walk with God. And there is a follow-on. What do I do with this story? It's quite a vulnerable story to carry. It's quite a big story to carry. And there is one big part that I haven't mentioned yet, and that's about the scars being healed. So I had 18 cigarette burns on my front and scars on my back that, in the course of the retreat at Release Academy, were miraculously healed, which for me released me completely from the shame that I carried about everything. Because with physical scars, they're scars that people can see and that you have to explain, that you have to always be aware of. And to have those disappear has just brought so much freedom. But it is still a very vulnerable story. And God has taken that story, and God has provided opportunities for me to use that story in crazy ways. So Premier Radio interviewed me. It was supposed to be for a 5-minute piece about how we responded to my daughter's stabbing, but the lady was intrigued and wanted to hear my full story. And she then turned it into a half-hour program, which has gone to many, many people. And I've had letters from people all over the world. They then turned it into a news article, which went out in their magazine, which has a large readership. But they say, well, the readership, we multiply it by 3 because people give the magazine away, and it just continues to go on around the world. It's been plagiarized. And I was really angry about it, the fact it had been plagiarized, but actually it's literally been taken word for word and put into other magazines that have gone out to places where women are really vulnerable and experience what I've experienced a lot. And I've had letters from these people saying that how God has spoken to them through my story. And even if I touch one person, it is worth me sharing my story. But it does take courage, and it does take persistence. It does take work. And this faith business is to be worked at. And my mindsets have been interrupted and challenged and broken and changed. And it's an intentional journey. I intentionally choose to follow, and I intentionally choose to look at how Jesus walked this earth, and I choose to try, and I ask God to help me show those attributes of Jesus to other people. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's the beauty of taking risk. But God loves it when you take a risk, and God will pitch up. Even when you don't take risks, God pitches up. And I just wrote, it's hard. It turns you upside down. It challenges you in every way possible. It's fun. It's an adventure. And if you encounters with Jesus, and when you let God in, it's amazing what happens. And we sang earlier about giving permission for God to come our hearts. So Doug asked us a question last week about what Jesus means to us. And I can honestly say, Jesus is my all. He is my everything. And I cannot imagine what my life would be like if I hadn't have let Jesus in, even though it was on my terms to start with on that morning after my attack. I choose to put my hand in his, and I trust every day that he will lead me through to the next adventure. And I was going to use that very famous passage from Corinthians about faith, hope, and love, and the greatest is love. And I can attest to that. I know that without faith, hope, and love, I have little. Without love, I have nothing. So every day I choose to embrace Paul's words in Colossians. And I pray this over you, really, that we can all do this and that we can all choose to do this every day when we wake up. So I say, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity and love. So each and every one of us has a gift from God. So open your hands and receive your gift. Go home, spend time with God and unwrap it and find out what adventure God wants to take you on, what part of your life he wants to speak into, and just let him do it, because there is so much freedom when you let God in.